Hi,
this is
hello
Darren.
there.
I was trying to figure out the Zoom thing to join as a panelist.
Okay. Yeah. We can give a little bit, some minutes.
Yeah, let's just give 4 minutes.
People to join.
I was looking over the notes last night, and I feel as if I was prepping for an exam in college. Thanks, Falco. I was like, oh my gosh, I haven't done this much studying since, you know. Those really cool questions, though. It just really highlights how some of the difficult questions that our customers are asking of you, and what we have to provide from our side. So super helpful.
Okay, should we get things started, or should we give it another minute?
Yeah, we can start and then yeah.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so first of all, welcome everyone to this webinar on runner scalability. So before kicking things off, I'll be doing a quick housekeeping. So if you do have any questions, do not hesitate to add them to our Q&A. So Benj, one of our commercial CSM, who's covering the French market, will be reviewing them throughout the session. Additionally, we'll also have 10 minutes at the end of the session to cover any questions that have not yet been answered. Finally, Benj will be dropping a few surveys during the course, so do make sure to keep an eye out on these. So to formally kick things off, once again, welcome everyone. So I'm really excited to get things started, as we've got a really great session lined up for you today on runner scalability with some amazing guests. So let's do a quick round of introduction. So my name is Clara, and I'll be one of your co-hosts for today's webinar. I'm a CSM for the commercial team here in EMEA, mainly covering the UKI market. Alongside myself, as your second co-host, I have the amazing Mariana, one of the other commercial CSMs. Mariana, do you want to quickly introduce yourself?
Yes, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining, first of all. I think some of you already know me, but for those who do not know me, my name is Mariana. I'm a CSM here at GitLab for more than 1.5 years, covering the DACH market. And yes, and I guess I can hand over to Falco.
Thank you so much. And yes, my name is Falco Sieverding. I'm here a co-host. I'm an enterprise CSM, and I'm joining today because we're on a bleeding edge technology step with our executor, with our auto-scaling executor, and I would love to ask Darren some questions. That's why I'm here today. I give it over to Darren.
Hi, and I'm Darren Eastman, the Principal Product Manager here at GitLab. I've been at GitLab for just about over 4 years now. I was looking at Falco's notes last night and thinking, oh my gosh, this is going to be a really hard test today. Anyway, happy to chat with everyone, and hopefully we can make this super interesting for you.
Perfect. I guess we can start. Again, I would welcome everyone during the podcast to just drop your questions here, and we would be more than happy to answer them in the end of our session today. Okay, Darren, you are our big star here.
Oh my gosh, that's a lot of pressure.
I also assume that a lot of people here know you, but we are. I also think that a lot of people, some people here, this topic, it's runners, it's confusing, it's cause a little bit of question. So why we don't start with the basics? So what are runners, and why we talk about them so much here at GitLab, and why they're so essential for CI and CD?
Yeah, that's a really good question. You know, I actually just came from my run this morning, and I was thinking, like, how do we end up with the initial word runner? And I think it was because many moons ago, it's kind of a really easy way to talk about the thing that runs a continuous integration pipeline, right? And so if you kind of like step all the way back, like in the old days, or the old days, before we had like cool DevOps platforms like GitLab, and you were just like, you know, you were in your entry-level computer science class in college, and let's say you were taking C++ for the first time, and you're writing your first C++ program. In order to compile that program, you're probably sitting at your computer, if you had a laptop back then, or maybe at some terminal, and you had to, you know, run the compile command. And the computer that you were on was the thing, right, that was compiling your software, right? It was, yeah, you wrote some code, and then you said, hey, whatever the command was, make or something like that. I can't remember now, it's been too long. And it would compile your code. So you fast forward to, you know, 2011, when GitLab comes to the market, and of course, you know, Git and the convergence of Git for source code management. And then GitLab was like, oh, we'll do Git and CI. And now you have the ability to offload that compilation job, to keep it simple, to different things. But you no longer have to be, you know, as the person writing that piece of code, typing into your computer, like, hey, you know, and being right there on the system. And so the runner is the thing, that agent that does that work for you, right? You just tell the runner, hey, I want you to go compile this piece of software. I want you to go build this Docker image, and the runner does it for you. And that's basically all what it is. It's a very simple piece of software that just kind of, you tell it what to do, and it does it. And for those folks that came up in the or that have a lot of experience doing Unix shell programming, Linux, of course, a derivative of Unix, BSD, et cetera, doing shell programming in Unix, right? It's really all about the fundamentals, already very close to shell scripting, right? You are automating some of these processes that a few years ago you'd have been writing these very sort of complex bash shell scripts to go take care of, and you're just taking off that workload and handing it to this thing called the runner to run it for you. So the runner runs a GitLab CI job. That's a long-winded answer to your question. Now I completely lost everyone, and everyone's fallen asleep on the first day of the podcast.
No, it's perfect. It's perfect. Maybe we can, I guess, clarify.
Yeah, thanks for that, Darren. I really appreciated the background about runners. I wasn't aware of that, so I found that super interesting. I guess bearing in with this in mind, would you be able to explain the differences between the runners that we support at GitLab?
Oh, I mean, like the different types that we offer?
Yeah.
Yeah, oh yeah, that's a really good question. And here's where it starts getting, I go from like a second ago, I was talking about, oh, the runner is a simple, very basic piece of software. It's really super easy. And now I'm gonna like talk about it being complex, and everybody's gonna like go fall asleep and like, what are they talking about? So to keep it simple, the brilliant minds, which I wasn't here at GitLab, and I can't take credit for this, the brilliant minds that came up with the original runner architecture as we know it today, they came up with the idea that, okay, it's going to be one application that can do many things or run jobs in many different environments. So today, if you go to gitlab.com and you go to like our runner documentation page, you know, we have these installations instructions, and it tells you, hey, are you interested in installing the runner on your Macintosh laptop? Are you interested in installing the runner on a Linux virtual machine? And you're like, oh, I'm going to go install that on my Macintosh laptop. Great. So you install the runner, and the runner, let's just keep it simple, install it on my Mac laptop. The next thing that we have is what we call execution environments, and we have shortened that to be called executors. And what it basically means is you install the runner, and then you tell the runner, hey, I want you to use this executor type. which basically means you're now going to be running the job in a specific execution environment. In the example I was giving in the Mac laptop, you'll just configure the runner to use the shell executor, which basically means it's just using the shell on the Mac operating system to run your jobs. But most of our customers will obviously choose, say, Docker as the executor type. So if you want to run your job in container images, which is what we basically do on GitLab.com for most of the Linux OS jobs, you can run a job in a Docker container. Or if you say, well, I want to install this runner on Kubernetes, then you grab the software for Kubernetes and you configure the runner or by default to use the Kubernetes executor. And so the runner has this concept, I'm kind of being very long-winded, about executor type. So the runner can be installed on various operating systems, Mac, Windows, Linux on Z, etc., but then also to be configured to execute or run your compilation job, your CI jobs, in different modes. Like, hey, I can run the job in a Docker container, or I can run the job directly on the compute host. So that's kind of basically that's different flavors, if you want to call it flavors. And then the last piece of that is, so that's sort of the simplistic thing. And then a lot of customers say, well, great, I get that basic concept, Darren, but now I want to be able to, like, quote unquote, auto scale. And then that's where we get into this whole sort of thought process of, we now have an option, what's called auto-scaling executor types in the runner. So our Kubernetes executor, for example, is an auto-scaling executor. And then we have other auto-scaling executors. So depending on what kind of infrastructure platform you're comfortable with, if you're comfortable with Kubernetes, or you're comfortable with managing virtual machines on AWS, or you're comfortable with managing virtual machines on Azure, or Google Cloud, or on OpenShift, what have you, you can choose the auto-scaling type of runner. So that's kind of what we have at a high level.
This is very nice, and I think that it's good for the attendees here, the customers, to also understand that a little bit better before we are going into more details about the main topic. And I think that talking about the main topic, as we were talking before, and you use a term that I like very much, Darren, and I would like for you to bring more context about this term, which is flexibility. Runners are super flexible, and also for me was a very new term. Like, we know, we are here at the GitLab, we know a lot all the options, the possibilities around this topic, but could you please tell us a little bit more about this flexibility, why it's so flexible, what can be done, just for us to understand a little bit better.
Yeah, it's a really good question. And can I share my screen, by the way? Is that okay? I have to talk about this.
Please, yes.
Scalable. Oh yeah, all right. So I'll put a little quick slide up here to talk about, to frame the whole scalability discussion. So tell me if you're seeing a PowerPoint presentation. Hopefully you are.
Yes, now we are.
Okay, okay, cool. So I'm going to talk about flexibility first, and then I'm going to talk about scalability. The slide is more the scalability point. Yeah, the runner is pretty flexible. I hate to use that kind of like trite saying from Spider-Man, but with great power comes great responsibility. I have a lot of customers asking me right now to give them a playbook for how to deploy runners in their environments. So stepping all the way back, if you're a customer on GitLab SaaS, right, you could start using our GitLab SaaS hosted runners just off the bat. You don't have to manage your own runners. However, as we all know, most companies' computing requirements, if you want to have a better word right now at the moment, is complex. Not everything can be in the cloud. And so you have the need in a lot of customer scenarios to manage their own compute, right? So customers are like, hey, yeah, I might be even on GitLab.com. I might be a self-managed GitLab customer as well. And I understand, to Miranda's point, hey, this runner thing, Darren, is pretty flexible. Like, where do I start? So in terms of flexibility, a couple of things to kind of think about. One is that when you if you're a self-managed customer and you're installing GitLab for the first time, you uncovered a nice shiny box that is GitLab 16.5, right? And you open this thing up and you're like looking at the screen like, okay, where do I start? And so the first paradigm to think about is that we have the concept of the instance, right? The top level thing that is GitLab, sort of the umbrella, everything is under the instance. And then, okay, that's all of my users, they're going to live within this instance. Great, got it. That's a simple concept. And then now you have this very flexible organizational structure for folks that came from the Microsoft days when Microsoft Active Directory came out. They spent a lot of time, Microsoft, they're talking about Active Directory and organizational units. And so GitLab has that very same flexibility. You can organize your GitLab environment to match your organization. So if you've got multiple different development groups, you've got marketing, you've got product, you can create different groups in GitLab, whatever it makes sense in terms of matching your organizational needs. And then, so you've got the top level, hey, I'm in GitLab instance, I've kind of figured out my organizational structure, which is these groups. And then maybe I'm going to have a few developers now, creating projects in GitLab to kind of, create software product. And that's where the flexibility conversation comes in. We have made the runner so flexible so that right off the bat, you can get going with CI by simply creating a runner at the instance level. So you can have one runner at the instance level on day one, if I'm assuming you're day one of using GitLab, just one small run on a laptop somewhere to keep things very simple, kind of like conceptually for a bit. Just one runner, install on my Mac laptop at the instance that's serving all of the CI jobs for that instance, right? If you don't lock down the GitLab environment on day one, right? If you don't set organizational policies on day one to say, hey, Darren or Mariana, a developer over in this team over here, I'm going to not allow them to add a new runner. But what most organizations do is like, hey, they're trying to figure things out. I don't want to restrict folks from getting their jobs done. I don't know if Darren's team needs a Mac OS runner. I don't know if this other team needs a Windows-based runner. I don't even know if this other team is doing something with IBM. Let me just leave it super open. And so from the super open perspective, on day one of using GitLab, your development teams can start adding runners to their projects, or your group owners can start adding runners. So that's a flexibility thing. And then it's also flexible from the point of view of, if, again, as I mentioned before, let's just say you have some team that's working on IBM mainframes, like we have some banking customers that do. Then you can install the runner on Linux on the IBM mainframe and get going, right? And so with one GitLab environment, one GitLab instance, you can service an organization because of the flexibility of the runner. You can service an organization that has software development teams writing apps for the Apple iStore, Apple Play Store, Apple, whatever the Apple Store is, Apple Store. Teams that are writing apps for the Android Play Store, teams that are writing apps for Windows, teams that are writing apps for the mainframe banking. So like for our banking customers, that's kind of a paradigm that we see, right? One GitLab instance, one runner, and they're able to do all of that stuff. So that's a flexibility thing. And in terms of scalability, the slide on the screen, I kind of like pulled some of the numbers out. This is just one of our GitLab.com runners, just one. And it's set up to be an auto-scaling runner. So it's kind of like one little runner software running on a virtual machine, one runner on a virtual machine on Google Cloud, a reasonably sized virtual machine. And then what it's doing is, as all these thousands of jobs are coming in daily, and sometimes per hour as well, as you can see from the slide, those little green bars are like the hour timestamps, right? This little one runner thing on this virtual machine is creating these thousands and thousands and thousands of other runner workers and running those jobs. So, wow, I just kind of blew through half an hour just kind of talking. So bring it back to center, please. Mariana, folks.
Yeah, I think it's incredible. It's especially seen from this graphic how like the difference, right? How it is like improving with scalability. But of course, for now, I would like to, as we presented before, I would like to invite Falco to give also some perspective from the scalability part. Like Falco has a lot of experience with enterprise and other customers. And I think that would be super nice to also hear his opinion here. So welcome, Falco, again. And if you could also give your thoughts around this topic, that would be super nice.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you for having me. Thank you, Darren, for this wonderful introduction and also for showing the flexibility directly at the start. Let's start there. Enterprise customer or also smaller customers will have the flexibility, as you said, on the project, group, and instance level to have shared runners, to have solo runners on the laptop anywhere they want. And we in GitLab have a wonderful system to direct this. And I would like to have your, let's say, opinion about this and perhaps also some best practices, even if I put you on the spot with this. We call this the tag system, where we can have the flexible runner, then also added with a tag with multiple tags, so that a workload, like we see on your shared screen, can go to the right set of runners or to the right auto-scaling set of runners. I do think in this example that we see here with the wonderful up and down movement of the runner load, we have the small Linux runner on SaaS, when I'm not mistaken, on the AMD64 platform. So what would be your suggestion when we go again to the GitLab box, just opened, installed, I have my Active Directory in, I have my groups in. What would the GitLab admin or the GitLab product owner try to do at the start to bring a tag system into an enterprise? And what are your thoughts about the tag system, how to best approach it?
I knew it was going to be a hard test today when I saw Falco on the call. I just knew the test was going to be hard. It's a great question. I've been actually thinking a lot about that this week because one thing I'm working on, and I started thinking about it. We started thinking about it over a year ago, and I must admit that we are just now getting around to actually writing it down. And if you go to I'm going to come back and make sure I answer Falco's question, but just give me some context. If you go to our docs right now for the runner, there's a small section in the runner docs, if you can find it, calling scaling a runner fleet. It's a very small section. It's just the tip of the proverbial iceberg, and it really doesn't go into the integrated details to answer the questions that Falco had. And so what I'm working on this week, I actually started typing some stuff up, is the first pass is what I'm calling the runner best practices scaling center. So I'm kind of using leveraging from the frameworks from our partners over at Google. They have a very nice architectural framework, and creating something like that. And as I was typing that this week, this whole question about tags was going through my mind, because I actually have another enterprise customer, Falco, that's asked me this week about the tagging process and can we use tags to do some other things. To answer your question directly, on day one, and today we are not very prescriptive about this at GitLab, and we will start being more prescriptive going forward. The first step in any sort of like stepping all the way back, system design 101, network architecture, whatever you want to call it, 101. The first step is that, I hate to say this, kind of documentary requirements, right? Like, hey, we're going to be, now it's kind of a fluid thing when I say documentary requirements, because I would imagine that if you're a net new GitLab customer today, you probably are not a net new DevOps customer or user. You probably have some other system and tools that you've been using for the last 10 years. So you kind of have an idea of what's going on, but it's still helpful to at least write down a piece of one page, hey, what are my high-level requirements for migrating to the one DevOps platform? How many developers do I have approximately in my org? Do I have a sense of what kind of different sort of development needs that I have, right? And just kind of like starting there helps you then to Falco kind of frame up what you might want to do on day one in terms of the initial run of fleet architecture. And I say this, and I'm calling it day one because I expect that over time, as customers kind of get more comfortable with GitLab, kind of see what's happening in their environment, it will change. So my recommendation on day one is start simple. Hey, based on the needs of, say, 70 to 80% of my developers, can I get by with just a very small initial run of fleet? And if so, then my tagging mechanism could be very simplistic to start, right? Like using the example from GitLab.com, our tagging mechanism is very simple because we're just offering for GitLab, all of the thousands of GitLab.com customers, approximately for our Linux and Docker runners, I think it's about 4 or 5 different flavors. So ours is a very simple tagging mechanism in that all we have to worry about is the compute that we're offering, right? So we just said, hey, we have a small, which is like, I think a 2 vCPU type virtual machine. I think we have a medium now, which is a 4. We have a large, which I think is an 8. Then we also have an extra large. So our needs are very simple for GitLab.com. However, now going back to my point about documenting your requirements, as you're like writing those requirements down, you might be like, oh, maybe 70% of my needs can just be met with a very simple tagging mechanism. But I've got this whole organizational policy over here that says, you know what? Only certain folks can deploy to this production environment. And so then you have to start thinking about, do I need a different mechanism to segment that kind of workload? So I think, Falco, as I'm running up this best practices document, my recommendation that I currently have in Doc is start small, start thinking first of a simple tagging mechanism to start. In terms of best practices, what we're seeing with other customers is that they use a combination of, most customers I've chatted with, the basics are tags based on compute, and maybe you've seen this as well, and also maybe tags based on the operating system. Like, so I have one customer that is in a mixed sort of computing environment. They have to support Docker builds as well as Windows. So they've got some runners tagged as Windows and some tagged as Docker. Anyway, I think I started talking so much. I'm not quite sure if I answered your question, Falco. So kind of bring me back and let me know if I need to get back to your key question.
I do think you brought us back. We will share definitely the show notes document that Darren just mentioned, the start of scaling a runner fleet, which is a great start, and I would love to collaborate with you there, Darren. And I do think best practices, as you said, operating system tags at the beginning, compute engine tags at the beginning, and for perhaps also executor tags, if you need special executors there, just to start, and then to iterate on it. As you said, org policies might come in, there might come in hardware in a loop, software in a loop systems that you need to specially address, but all that can grow at the later start. Just documentation is the first step, as you really said. So with this a little bit described and the promise that we bring out best practices later, let's start talking about the exciting stuff. We have a little bit of a history. 2015, the runner began. 2016, first auto-scaling features in the runner. Then our move to Docker Machine. Then 2018, I think Docker Machine deprecation, our own fork into Docker Machine, not the move to Kubernetes. And I want your opinion on this. This is the first question. And now the new exciting autoscaler, which is an abstraction with fleeting inside. Fleeting, the explanation I want from you. To get one abstraction that we can have container and Kubernetes and other autoscaling plus instance set autoscaling and other executor autoscaling in one wonderful abstraction that we can handle and that is easy to handle for our customers. So let's start. Why Docker Machine, not Kubernetes?
Wow. It goes back to the flexibility question. I wasn't here when the decision was made to support Kubernetes and so on and so forth, right? I think it was the right decision because, quite frankly, we know that Kubernetes continues to grow in the marketplace, right? And so how many years ago, the original GitLab team, the original GitLab CI and runner team decided to add a Kubernetes executor. It was the right decision because look where Kubernetes has gone. With that said, now you're spot on, Falco. We've got multiple options for customers in terms of choosing what kind of autoscaling runner to go with, right? And then we go to this slide here. And so it's a really good question. Like, why Kubernetes? Why, Kubernetes versus Docker Machine? It's really interesting question. Last week, I was on a call with a very, very large customer. The specific customer, I say large in terms of runner scale, they're running approximately, I forget the math per day, but per month, approximately 3 million CI jobs per month. So that's 3 million. So you can kind of like back up the math and get my math in terms of the daily number of CI jobs. So 3 million CI jobs per month. They had started on Docker Machine 2 years ago. When I first joined GitLab, they were on Docker Machine. I think they've migrated, my conversation last week, most of their workloads to Kubernetes. So I asked them, it's 178,000 jobs per day. So I asked them last week, hey, so what's the deal? Like, why Kubernetes? Weren't you happy with the Docker Machine thing? And even though for them, there are some challenges with Kubernetes, right? Obviously, they had to build an internal team skill set just around managing Kubernetes clusters, right? Because it's a little different than just say managing a virtual machine, for example, perhaps, or even Red Hat OpenShift or some of these other things. So they had to kind of like build that Kubernetes muscle, one. And the other challenge that they're running into is that, and we haven't figured out a way yet on the runner side to solve this challenge, is that on Kubernetes, right, as a CI job comes in, or any workload that comes into Kubernetes, regardless if it's a GitLab CI workload or not, there is a slight delay before that pod that's going to execute the work is ready, right? The Kubernetes API says, hey, I got some work to do. Somebody hits the Kubernetes API, say, hey, you got some work to do. And then the Kubernetes API does its thing. It's like, oh, I'm going to create a pod. But there's like a delay. Sometimes it's a few milliseconds, sometimes it's 5, 10. So that pod has to start up. From a CI perspective and from an experience for your developers perspective, depending on the load of your Kubernetes cluster, depending on the size of the container image that's using your job, that pod startup time could be like frustrating for a developer, like looking at the pipeline. So I asked them about that, but yeah, we're okay with that. It's kind of not perfect. It would be great if you GitLab could figure out a way to like somehow get around the pod startup time issue on Kubernetes. And I'm like, okay, well, try to figure that one out. And we're okay with the sort of the operational burdens of Kubernetes. But what they have found in their world is that, and their particular best practice might be different than anybody else's. Every night, they roll a new version of the runner onto their fleet. So they have like, A and B, like primary runner cluster, disaster recovery. I forget how many clusters they have, but they have obviously at least a primary and a secondary. And they roll new versions every night. So they like refresh the entire fleet every night. And because with Kubernetes, it's just a hem upgrade, it's almost instantaneous, the upgrade or the refresh. Whereas with Docker Machine, this is a Docker Machine thing. This is kind of more of an orchestration of the installation bits thing. With the Docker Machine-based runner, and even the other ones, you have to install the runner, you have to run some Terraform things, and apply apt updates. Some more stuff has to go in. So for them, it was about right now today, the choice for Kubernetes, it's about the ease of use in terms of their nightly updates. And they seem to be
management is much easier
Thank
with
you.
Kubernetes. Okay.
That's the word I was looking for. I know I should have studied for this test. I mean, yeah. But like, so they're not the only example customer that are quite happy with scaling. Now, the one thing I did not ask them about is the fifth bullet on this slide, and I completely forgot. I had a brain freeze last week in my conversation. I forgot to ask them about the Docker and Docker builds on their environment. Because that's the one thing that even though if you have your Kubernetes cluster solid, right? You know what I mean? Like, you know what I mean? Right? You can scale to millions of jobs, like one Kubernetes cluster, one runner, and you can do a bunch of scaling. This question about like the Docker and Docker build and privilege mode keeps coming up and how to get around that. I didn't ask them how they got around it, or if they are allowing it in their environment, and if they are, why they're allowing it. But so we have more. It seems like in my conversations recently, Falco, like it's kind of starting to split. Like I'm starting to see like anecdotally a small shift to like more customers like liking the Kubernetes option, even though there's some complexity involved with just managing Kubernetes. Docker
They
Machine,
have already the expertise of the teams, Kubernetes teams in their teams, and that they can then use to lead also the runner fleet team. Thank you. Sorry, I will shut up.
And then no, keep talking. No, just don't let me. Keep interrupting so we can have a conversation. And then the Docker Machine or based Autoscaler now replaced with a new one. It's simpler to no, I should say simply it's the wrong way to frame it. You don't have to have Kubernetes expertise, and you don't have to worry about managing all of the stuff with Kubernetes. You don't have to have the additional heavy. Of course, you have to monitor your computer environment. Don't get me wrong, but we all know it's Kubernetes monitoring may be different than, say, monitoring a virtual machine-based stack, for example, right? And so with the Docker machine autoscaler or with a new runner autoscaling solution, which is this, the runner host is just a virtual machine, right? It's not a Kubernetes cluster. And so that for some customers is easier to like, hey, I don't need to build up a whole team of Kubernetes experts to manage it. What I like, and we'll see what happens as the new runner autoscaling solution transitions from beta to GA. We'll be interested to see if customers start adopting this versus Kubernetes over time. What I like about this new solution for customers that, like, for example, maybe on AWS today, is the flexibility it provides if you have mixed mode computing needs. Like with one runner, back to the flexibility point, Mariana, if you're on AWS, like with one runner, just the one in a VM, you can run jobs that are like in Docker containers. You can run jobs in Apple's, on AWS's Apple M1 instances. You can run jobs on Windows nodes, spun up in your AWS environment with just one little simple runner on AWS. So anyway, that's Falco. Yeah, it's a great question. What do you think?
I do think the flexibility that you mentioned before comes into what we have now created also. As you rightly said, Kubernetes is everywhere. And if you have a Kubernetes team, you can take a Kubernetes cluster for your web development. For your, let's say, 90% of the cases, a Kubernetes cluster is great. It works well. Small jobs will have a longer time that they are running in there because of the pod startup. So we give also the options, and we use the option ourselves to have an abstraction where you can have a multi-cloud and also a plug-in open system where you can put in your hybrid cloud to start VMs, VM instances, Docker containers, and everything for your workload. That's what I love about this. That's why I'm excited about this. Perhaps you can shortly talk about this. We offer now AWS, GCP, and Azure plugins into the autoscaling directly from out of the box. We do this, but we also offer the customer that they can use their own APIs for their own cloud vendor, or perhaps also the on-prem hardware to use it for base runner load. Let's say it like this. Yeah,
that's really, you're right. And and this is the diagram, that kind of like high-level diagram that talks about the new autoscaler. And to Falco's point, my partner tells me that I'm colorblind. So the task kill and the fleeting boxes, I see the color is purple, or is it blue? Anyway, is it purple? Okay, Race gives you a thumbs up. It's the purple boxes. So to keep it super simple, and I am not the engineer that's writing this code. I really have to give a shout out to two engineers on the GitLab Runner core team, Aaron Walker, who's over in the UK, and Joe Burnett, who is in Seattle, somewhere in Seattle, Washington. They were the primary architects of this technology. Keep it short, task kill and feeding. That logic is built into your runner app itself. And at the Falco's point over here on the right-hand side, the orangey color box, that's a new word today for all of the folks on the call. That's my new technical term, orangey. I'm patenting that term today, orangey. It's the plugin framework. And so what we did, or what the team decided to do here, which I totally agree as a product manager, it's like, yeah, it's a super idea. Instead of like us having this thing so coupled together that was really difficult for us to support other clouds, it's a plugin-based framework. So everything's a plugin. So as long as the target public cloud provider supports a concept of auto-scaling groups, like AWS uses auto-scaling groups. I think Azure has a slightly different term. I think GCP has a slightly different term, but basically that concept, then you can just create a plugin to interface with that cloud provider scaling concept. To Falco's point, we have developed the plugins. Actually, we developed the plugin for AWS and GCP, and we're transitioning both of those to beta right now. I believe the initial Azure plugin was actually a community contribution, but we will own support of that going forward. And then the idea is that folks can create other plugins as needed. To date, I did create a new issue to see if the community wanted to create a plugin for, say, VMware. because we had a customer that's using, I had a conversation customer 2 weeks ago that's on the VMware stack and vSphere. I always get the VMware terms confused, like whatever the VMware on-premise thing is called these days, vSphere. And then we had a really good result with a very large technology customer with this plugin. Let me just kind of like, give me 2 seconds to talk about this story to highlight how cool this technology is. It was really super cool. I was like, wow, we did this. So I got pulled into this customer call with a super like top-notch like customer. I mean, they have the best technologists in the world. They could put people, I mean, they know their stuff, right? And they're like, hey, we want to do autoscaling. I'm like, great, we've got, like now we have, yeah, but we don't use the public cloud stuff. We've got our own internal technology stack that we built. That's our own custom homegrown stuff. So I'm on the call and I'm like, oh, really? And they're like, yeah, we want to autoscale on this thing. And I'm like, oh, really? You do? And they're like, yeah. And I'm like, I'm scratching my head, like, how am I going to address this problem? And our developers are like, hey, we'll show you how to write a plugin. And they have actually written a plugin, and they're almost over the wire, that's allowing the run to autoscale on their own custom cloud stack internally. So I'm super excited in terms of the plugin framework would go. And in the next couple of weeks, as we release the beta on Falco, actually started writing more blog posts to kind of highlight some of the cool things that this thing provides.
I'm looking forward to read those, and Joe's and Aaron's videos explaining the technical background are really, really superb. Let's say it like this. We will put those in the show notes. All this needs a little bit of a backbone, and autoscaling is also, let's say, a feature that needs some signals. So I would hand it off to Clara Mariana, because metrics would be our next point of focus, but we wanted to discuss and know also from your expert knowledge, what do you think about this? So thank you again, Darren. It was wonderful.
No problem.
Thank you very much for that, Falco, and thank you, Darren. That was extremely interesting. Just in the interest of time, so just moving on to metrics and the roadmap. So obviously, monitoring our runner fleet is extremely important in the interest of performance and resource management. So with this in mind, Darren, what would you say are some of the best practices that should be implemented for monitoring runners?
Yeah, so I'm gonna link the video. I was looking for it last night, and I should have it. I'll drop it in the chat in a second. So about 2 months ago, one of the original runner engineers, Thomas Musukin, I'll just go over Thomas for sure. Apologies, Thomas, if you're looking at this video later on and I butchered your last name. We created a video that's covering how to get started with GitLab runner monitoring using Grafana, right? So today, out of the box with GitLab, with each GitLab run, I should say, right, we have what's called Prometheus metrics endpoints. So if our recommendation when you are starting out, especially to run a fleet, is to enable those Prometheus metrics endpoints and use some of our run books that we have publicly available, and it's covered in that video and shows you how to get going to set up some monitoring using the Prometheus metrics endpoints that are exposed in the runner, and like setting up some of this monitoring in Grafana. On the screen right now, I'm just showing you a snapshot of one of the many Grafana dashboards that we use here at GitLab.com for monitoring our runner fleet. Much more extensive than what most customers would need, because obviously at GitLab.com, we've got thousands and thousands of customers, millions and millions of users. So we're monitoring everything, right? We're monitoring if the sun comes up in the morning at the right time, you know what I mean, right? I would say that the basic things that that are important on day one for monitoring runners that we hear a lot from customers, and which we agree, is like the queues. Like how is the queue performance, right? If you only have a couple of runners, for example, at your instance, servicing your entire organization, you kind of want to make sure that they're not getting saturated by jobs, because the developers, what we hear from our administrators is that developers hate waiting for jobs. Performance of CI jobs is like the most important thing for developers. And so monitoring the queue performance is super important. And I think once you get that done, then you can kind of go into like other things like, hey, do you want to look at like CPU load and stuff like that? But today out of the box, you must have to build those dashboards yourself with using, Prometheus metrics endpoints, pumping that data into something like a Grafana, et cetera, et cetera. And that's good for folks that are, comfortable with this kind of like telemetry type framework, and so on. Where we're going though is putting some more of this stuff, let me find it, directly into the runner, into the GitLab environment. And so the runner fleet management dashboard, and what you're seeing, that new screenshot on the right-hand side, yay, is actually not just a mock-up anymore. That screenshot is actually from GitLab.com. We deployed this for our own internal dog food on GitLab.com a couple of weeks ago. And this was a screenshot from last week, Friday, where we're starting to monitor GitLab, not monitor, but we're using the dashboard to kind of see how it's effective on GitLab.com. Because it's going to be a really good case study because as I just showed you, like our GitLab.com SRE folks, they've got like gazillion dashboards to monitor this thing. The long-term vision is, I think we will have kind of a mix of both because there's so much you can do in terms of flexibility of what one can do with Prometheus and Grafana dashboards. You can kind of like mix and manage and do all kinds of cool stuff. But the idea would be that if you're on Ultimate, at the very least on day one, when you start using GitLab or you adopt the version of GitLab with this stuff in there, you have some basic, most important metrics to manage your runner fleet. You know what I mean? Like this, like the recent failures, for example, which runners are active right now, and you can kind of see the load on them. And then on the bottom quadrant, the wait time to pick up a job, which basically means like, hey, if that number is going up, then there's a problem. And very soon your developers are going to start knocking on your door saying, hey, the performance looks awry. So if you're doing this on your own today, I will share the link to the video, but you definitely want to monitor queue times. It's the most important thing, and like the saturation of the runners to start. That's just the two most basic things to look at. It will get you like, I would say 70% of what you need to make sure developers aren't angry on a Friday afternoon.
Perfect.
So, go ahead, Melanie.
Oh, no, yeah, I saw also Falco. Do you have any comments?
I would love to shout out also to our engineers because we have a set of Grafana dashboards directly out of the box that you can use to the start, Darren. And there again, I think the flexibility and iterative approach, what you want to see when you want to see it, would be the best so that you have it. Let me ask you, what do you do or what do you suggest when we go to the flexibility project, group runners, instance shared runners? How do I monitor who registered, run it, where? So not the performance metrics, but really, is a dev laptop still connected as a runner and is working in the background? We don't know about that.
So on this view, right? So yeah, that's a really good question. So it goes back to full circle, and I'm writing this, including a little section about this exact point in the best practices guide. And in fact, when I created ML, I'll definitely tag you on there to get your team's perspective. Some customers that I've talked to, they don't have the resources to administer everything for all developers. I have some customers, as they probably do as well, that have like thousands and thousands of developers in their org. And so for them, it's like, look, we're going to allow our developers, at the project level or the group level, to create runners to service their own needs as they see fit, because we don't have the capacity. That is definitely a fair paradigm for some security not for some. For all customers, you have to balance that flexibility with what I think the Falco you're alluding to is the security and compliance concerns of having that sprawl, right? Because now you could potentially have, if you've got, say, 1,000 projects in your GitLab instance, and you've allowed all these projects to attach your own build runner to it, now you potentially have 1,000 things that could be potentially be compromised. Now, if it's within your own environment, the quote unquote sort of like surface area is maybe manageable because you theoretically have security and compliance controls around your own internal network. So I think it's a choice customers have to make very, very clearly. Hey, on day one, GitLab, we're enabling you to do what makes sense for your organization. Here are the pros and cons, the risk of if you go all in with everything. With that said, for those customers that have gone the route of, yes, groups can create their own runners or developers can create their own runners. On this screen right now, and it's done a great shot of it. What we've been doing is adding more capabilities to this screen. So as we move to the new runner token architecture framework, the new way of creating runners, right? You'll be able to, as an admin, see who has created a runner. So you'll see traceability, right? And over time, we'll potentially add like notification alerts, if that makes sense, based on customer feedback. Hey, do you want to be alerted when Darren adds a new runner, right? So that's step one. And then the other thing we're adding is that once Darren creates a runner, and if that runner token that he generates during creating that runner is then reused to create or attach other runners to the environment, you'll see that entire list of runner machines rolled up under the sort of the parent. So we're hopefully giving the admins more visibility in terms of what's happening in the runner estate, right? So at least if they choose to have it be flexible, they can understand what's going on, they can see who's doing what, and then maybe over time as we get feedback from the customers on this call, like, hey, do you want us to be giving you alerts about folks that are adding runners? Do you want us to give you alerts about runner versions that are outdated? Do you want us to give you alerts about, I don't know, security? And whatever it is, let us know and we'll try to surface it in these views.
You opened now 2 barrels directly with your answer, but we are a little bit short on time. So this dashboard is, no, absolutely not. Your knowledge is so great, and I would like to discuss 2 hours with you about this. But let's say this dashboard is also great for runner lifecycle management, where you have now the possibility to see which runners are out of date, which new versions are there, and how you can do this. But you touched security. So my short question is, what is the one thing a GitLab admin should always think about when they set up runners in scope of security, in scope of governance security?
The first thing I'm gonna answer it this way. For most folks in the call that have been doing DevOps or SRE, or in the old days, I guess we used to call that before the SRE to systems and network administration. The first thing to think about, it's basic system administration, system security, network security 101, right? This start with that frame. When a CI solution like GitLab is a very powerful solution, very, very powerful, right? You're putting this code into GitLab, right? In that project repo, right? That's the first thing you got to think about. And when you're now building that code, the runner and the environment in which you're building it on has access to your repository, right? And so security, just kind of thinking about a security profile, like, hey, do you know who has access to your project repo? Do you know? Okay, check. Got it. We've got the security codes and controls in GitLab, so you do thumbs up on that. And then from a runner standpoint, you're like, okay, if I'm doing instance level runners, for example, not the ones on the laptops, okay, who has access to this environment, right? For most folks that are AWS practitioners, it's pretty locked down. So you want to make sure that the environment in which that's hosting a runner is pretty locked down, because once that runner reaches out and grabs that job, right, it's executing that code. And so theoretically, someone could like dump some script as part of that CI job, right? And that script will run on the target host environment. So understanding that security profile, right, is important, like making sure that you have access. Now, the way we've mitigated some of that on GitLab.com is back to the auto-scaling point, which is and that's one of the reasons we on GitLab.com still using the virtual machine-based auto-scaling options, is that every job runs in an isolated ephemeral VM, one-time use. It sounds pretty expensive. It sounds pretty heavy, especially if you're using all these API calls on AWS or GCP to spin up a VM for every single job. That means that, like in the example I was giving earlier, that's 3 million VMs spun up over the course of a month. But it means that at least you've contained the blast radius to this thing that's going to go away, right? And so again, so things like, oh, my developers want to be able to use Docker to build a container, and because the Docker runtime needs privileged mode access, and because of the way it does seccomp, Then you could be like, okay, I can do virtual machine-based autoscaling, isolated ephemeral, and restrict the blast radius. So understanding that CI is a very powerful, as one commentator out there put it in a blog post, CI is a very powerful remote execution engine, right? So you've got to understand and kind of think about that first, and then, okay, make decisions about what makes sense for your organization in terms of like flexibility for developers, as well as like marrying, flexibility and kind of making the right choice from a security and compliance perspective. So there's no easy answer, but hopefully I'll have some guidelines in the best practices guide that will help folks make the right decision.
Thank you. This was super nice. Thank you, Darren. And I'm looking forward to the dashboard, to be honest. It's something super exciting, this future. Really, yeah. We are hearing about a lot here from customers and users, the need, and they're willing to have that here on the, especially on the UI, sorry. We have 4 minutes. I guess we have time for one question here. I think that one question that is super nice, that maybe a lot of people think about it. So what is the impact of CI/CD pipeline complexity on GitLab runner scalability, and how can it be mitigated?
It only impacts the runner. So it's an interesting question. If on day one you set up an instance level runner that's auto scaling, then there's no impact to the runner. Because what happens is if your pipeline, for example, is a very, very deep parallel pipeline, let's say it's 100 jobs, the one runner will just create runner workers for 100 jobs. So if you've already created an auto scaling runner, you don't have an issue. If, however, the runner that you have is a non-auto scaling runner, right, then you'll potentially run into compute constraints for a very complex pipeline that's like, maybe it's really, really deep in terms of parallel jobs. So that's where that goes back to like understanding your developer profile on day one. And that's why a lot of our large customers choose to go with auto scaling runners on day one, because that way, regardless of what comes in from the development teams, the runner environment can handle it. It's like, oh, you've got 1,000 jobs in this pipeline, no problem. I'll just create 1,000 workers and knock your job out for you.
Yeah, this is a very good point. Thank you, Darren. Considering that we have only 2 minutes, I would just like to conclude here and saying, first of all, Darren, thank you very much. Not only thank you for your session today here, but thank you for all your effort with the product, always trying to bring the best here for all the users. It's very much appreciated. Thank you, Falco, for joining us here and bringing all the knowledge and experience. That it was super nice and great to have you here. We appreciate everyone who joined. If you have questions later, you are more than welcome to contact your CSM. We'll be also very glad to forward them to Darren. Again, also thank you very much for all those who joined. And Darren, again, thank you. And I wish you all a great end to the day, or remaining work, remaining day. Darren, for you, start the day. But
that's right. Second cup of espresso on the way.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everybody. It was wonderful. Bye.